Pre-production is by far the most important part of the process for not only time-lapse photography, but filmmaking as a whole. By being prepared from the start, production and post-production will always go way smoother. As part of the pre-production phase, I'm going to be investigating 3 different areas. I'm going to be looking at story, scheduling, and scouting. What I want to do with this video is give you a few tips that will hopefully decrease your margin for error. To help with this process, I'm going to be producing a short film at the same time as this tutorial to give you an insight to how I approach different situations, as well as to help showcase my workflow. The first area I want to look at is story. The first thing you want to do is deconstruct your story and find out how you're going to use your time-lapse to help tell your story. If you're a new filmmaker, this is especially important. In this section, I'll be looking at a few different things you'll need to consider when trying to tell a visual story. For the short I'm producing along with the tutorial, I want to tell the story of home and how, no matter how old you are, you can connect to the idea of home. There are many ways you can use a time-lapse to help tell a story. In order to understand how to use it, you need to know how to tell a story through a single image. When analyzing works of art, there are a few different categories you need to consider, which include form, content, and context. This also includes all its encompassing elements. Form can be broken down into 3 different sections. The first is the primary features, which are basically the elements you use to construct your image. This includes such things as line, shape, color, those types of things. The second is your secondary features, which are basically how the elements were used to construct the image. This includes how you compose your image, the use of negative space, that type of thing. And the last one is your tertiary concerns, which is how your form interacts with your content and context. As for content, this is essentially the message you're trying to relay. This includes the literal, figurative, and metaphorical meanings. The last of the 3 is context. Context encompasses a few different elements and is probably the hardest of the 3 to decipher. The primary context is the artist's intentions, and the secondary context is the function the work of art plays in the currency of time. This includes the economic, political, or religious conditions that existed when the work of art was produced. Now, what does this all mean? In relation to a single image, what elements are you going to use to help tell your story? Basically, what is the message you're trying to tell? If you're a cinematographer, you need to think of how you're going to construct this image. Are you going to use a cluttered frame? How are you going to deal with negative space? If you're shooting a landscape, you need to think of how and why you're going to shoot that. Is it a visual exploration of space and time, or is it something more? The more is what you want to aim for. For the idea of home, there are a few different options. The literal image could be the actual image of this space. However, if you want to take it a step further, you could use the figurative or metaphorical image. This could include such things as a turkey coming out of the oven, a smile, or anything you can relate to personally, however ambiguous it is. For this short, I'm going to use the image of the turkey coming out of the oven. Once you know how to tell a story from a single image, you need to think of how to juxtapose images to tell a new story, similar to how collections of art work together. If you take each piece of work separately, they tell their own message. However, if you bring them all together, they tell a cohesive one. When producing a film of any kind, it's important to know how a film is constructed. I won't be going in depth about this now, as I'll be covering this more extensively in an upcoming education series on filmmaking. However, there are a few things you need to be aware of. Films are constructed in 3 acts. The first is exposition, which is used to establish the main characters, their relationships, and the worlds they live in. The first act establishes the inciting incident or the catalyst. The second act is the rising action, which typically depicts the protagonist's attempt to resolve the problem initiated by the first turning point. The second turning point is in most cases the climax. Lastly, the third act features the resolution of the story. For the short film on home, the exposition is the lead character's decision to finally visit his parents since the sale of the childhood home. The rising action is a lead character's struggle with this change. As for the climax, this shows the lead character's acceptance of both the change in his life as well as his parents' life. When I approach a film, the first thing I think about are words or phrases that relate to the message. I then try to filter out the main concept and how to express these ideas on screen. These images can be developed from either metaphorical, literal, or figurative ideas. For this film, what differentiates the place you happen to live with the place you call home? Is it a feeling? Is it the people? What is the relationship between home and family? Is home defined by internal feelings or by external conditions? All these ideas need to be considered before you start shooting. Once you have a clear idea of the story you want to tell, the next thing you want to do is break down your shots. From a traditional short or feature film standpoint, the producer and production manager break down your budget, the first AD breaks down your schedule, and your director and director of photography break down your shots. Now, whether you have one or many people breaking down your scripts, the more specific you are, the smoother production will go. For my short, I'll be the only one breaking down the script. Principal photography will be taking place across the US and Canada, using the broad concept of place as the backbone of the story. I'll be showcasing many literal forms of home through montage as well as time-lapse to help tell a visual story. I'm going to use travel as a way to express the journey the lead character experiences in order to accept this change. There are many great tools that exist for location scouting. I use three main ones. I use Google Maps, the local film directory, and location managers. The first is Google Maps. When you launch Google Maps, you will notice a photos feature built in. By selecting this, you'll see first-hand shots of what certain locations look like. This is a great way to mark specific locations that may have the conditions you desire. Although a great option, it is only as powerful as what other people have explored. Another option are the local film agencies. Most countries, states, or provinces have local scouting libraries you can reference. Although a little harder to get, it's a great way to gain access to hard-to-find locations. The last option I use are location managers, which are people that scout locations for a living. If possible, I usually try scout the location before shooting. Not only does it help eliminate the guesswork, it also helps with efficiency on the day of shooting. Although all are extremely effective, there's a few things you want to keep in mind. The first is that the locations will usually be skewed from what you visualize in your head, so you want to assume a margin for error. The second thing is that you want to get creative and not replicate a shot you've already seen. Before heading out to any location, you will want to gain access to paper copies of maps for each area you hope to explore. There are a few apps that exist that allow you to access your markers offline, but the best way to ensure you are prepared is to have paper copies. Mark out the regions that you think may be film-worthy and note the times you want to explore these areas. In all cases, mark out 2 maps, one you will keep and one you will give to a friend or family member, with check-up markers at various points on the map. If you're going deep into the wilderness, it is key to have a backup plan. There are a few other things you want to consider about your location as well, including its accessibility, whether you have access to power, and if there's cell reception. There's no such thing as being over-prepared. I've had a few questions in regards to gaining access to locations, and there's a few different ways you can approach this. The best method is to be open and transparent with anybody you work with, from location owners to collaborators. Have a few clips prepared similar to the ones you'll be shooting. Find out what you need from the location and what you can offer in return. Like any negotiation, the better you are at dealing with people, the better chance you have at gaining access to these locations. Now, once you've gained access to these locations, treat them as if it was your own property. You're not only representing yourself, but you're representing filmmakers to follow. I don't know how many times I've been turned away because of a burnt location. There are a few things to consider when scheduling, including weather, access to locations, access to equipment, cast, crew, and budget. Weather is by far the most limiting factor. It is the one thing that could keep you from getting your shot time and time again because it's unpredictable. Ensure you have a block of days you can choose between and hope one of these days have ideal shooting conditions. Unless you're hiking long distances or capturing shots that require talent, you won't have to worry about the cast or crew element. However, if you do, you want to determine what shots require cast or crew and schedule them into blocks of shooting days. In regards to getting equipment, one of my biggest words of advice is developing relationships with other filmmakers and supporting their creative endeavors. Not only will this help you become a better filmmaker, but it will also be another avenue for getting equipment. Relationship building is by far one of the most important things with filmmaking. Budget is also a limiting factor. Not only does it dictate the amount of shooting days, sometimes it can limit the types of shots you can accomplish. What this means is that you need to be creative and resourceful to get the shots you desire. No matter how prepared you are when shooting, surprises always seem to surface. While shooting the home piece, we were confronted with two separate obstacles. While headed to one of our locations, we got a flat tire and were forced to reschedule. And the second occurrence was at one of our locations. Although we had scouted multiple times, on the night of shooting, our location was flooded and we were forced to relocate. The last thing I want to talk about in this video is gear prepping. Once you've broken down your script and shooting schedule, you'll have a good idea of what gear you'll need for what shoot. Before I go out to any shoots, I'll configure the rig in studio to ensure I have all the pieces I need with me. Once I've determined what gear I'll be using, I'll then determine how to pack it based on how I'm getting to the location. Lastly, I'll make sure both my lenses and cameras are in perfect working condition. For the sample video, I have a few extensive setups, so it's extremely key that I break down the shots in advance. I'll go more in depth about the kits in the next video.